The clinking of wine glasses and the laughter of old friends filled our home that night. It was supposed to be a celebration. 20 years of marriage, a milestone everyone kept telling me was rare, sacred, and beautiful. I had dressed in a simple navy blue dress, the one Michael once told me made my eyes shine. I'd spent all afternoon preparing his favorite meal, setting the table with the silverware we'd received on our wedding day, and arranging white roses in the center because he always said they reminded him of purity. But as I stood in the corner of the room, quietly watching him talk to her, I realized something inside me had shattered. Her. She wasn't a stranger. She wasn't just a friend of a friend or some fleeting guest who happened to wander into our celebration. No. She was someone who had been around for years, someone I had trusted, someone I had shared recipes with, laughed with, even cried with when her mother passed away. Karen. Her hand lingered far too long on his arm when she whispered in his ear. I caught the way his lips curled into that secret smile I hadn't seen in so long, the one he used to give me when no one else was looking. My heart thudded so loudly I swore everyone in the room could hear it, but the world around me kept spinning in slow motion. The sound of laughter, the background music, the faint clinking of forks against plates, it all blurred into a dull echo. Everything okay, honey? My sister leaned over and whispered, her brow furrowed. I forced a smile that felt like shards of glass pressing against my lips. Of course, everything's perfect. But everything was not perfect. As the evening dragged on, I couldn't shake the subtle touches, the shared looks, the way he leaned in closer to her than he ever did with me anymore. And then it happened, so quick, so cruel, that I wondered if I had imagined it. I had gone into the kitchen to grab another bottle of wine. When I came back, I froze in the hallway. The angle was perfect, like God himself wanted me to see it. His hand was on her thigh under the table, hidden from the others. Her lips parted slightly as she stifled a laugh, her eyes glittering with the thrill of a secret. My stomach lurched. I wanted to scream, to walk into that room and flip the table over, to shatter the glasses and let the wine bleed across the floor like my heart was bleeding inside my chest. But instead, I stood there, gripping the neck of the wine bottle so tightly I thought it might crack. He had been mine for 20 years. 20 years of loyalty, sacrifice, compromise. 20 years of raising children, paying bills, holding his hand through failures, and cheering him on in successes. 20 years of believing in the vows he spoke with trembling lips as he slipped a ring onto my finger. And all along had he been laughing at me. When I finally walked back into the dining room, I smiled. My hands were shaking, but no one noticed, not even him. He was too busy gazing at her. Here we are, I said softly, setting the wine bottle on the table. The night continued. To the guests. It was nothing more than a cheerful celebration. To me, it was the night my world cracked open. Later, after everyone left, I waited. He was in the living room, loosening his tie, humming to himself. I leaned against the doorway, my arms crossed. Michael, I said, my voice steady. How long has it been? He looked up at me, confusion flashing across his face. What are you talking about? You and Karen. My words sliced through the air like a blade. How long? For a moment, he froze, and in that silence, I had my answer. Guilt washed over his features before he could mask it with indignation. Don't be ridiculous, he snapped, shaking his head. You're imagining things. I laughed, a hollow, broken laugh that sounded foreign in my own ears. I saw you. Tonight, your hand under the table, the looks. Do you really think I'm that blind? He rubbed his forehead and sighed. It's not what you think? It's exactly what I think. I shot back, my voice trembling. How long? His jaw tightened. His silence was louder than any confession. And then, like a coward, he said, does it matter? We've been married 20 years. Don't you think things change? Change. That word hit me harder than a slap. So that's it, I whispered. 20 years, Michael. 20 years of my life? And you throw it away like it's nothing. He glared at me, his voice rising. Don't act like you're perfect. Do you know how hard it's been to live with you sometimes? Always nagging, always suspicious. Maybe if you'd tried harder, maybe if you hadn't let yourself go. The rest of his words blurred, drowned out by the roaring in my ears. I couldn't breathe. My body felt numb, my chest heavy. Enough, I said finally, my voice cold. Just enough? I turned and walked upstairs, leaving him to mutter curses under his breath. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every laugh we had shared, every kiss, every whispered promise, none of it felt real anymore. It was all tainted, poisoned by his betrayal. And as the clock ticked past midnight, a thought crept into my mind, a thought so dark, so consuming that I felt both terrified and alive at once. If he wanted to play games in the shadows, I would show him what real betrayal looked like. I would not cry myself to sleep for the next 20 years. No, I would make him regret the day he ever underestimated me. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I swore in that moment his betrayal would not go unanswered, and the revenge I was going to plan, he would never see it coming. I didn't sleep the night after the anniversary dinner. The ceiling fan traced slow circles like a hypnotist pocket watch, and every soft click felt like a metronome measuring the rhythm of an ending. By dawn, the bedroom looked cruelly ordinary. His cufflinks on the dresser, my lotion on the nightstand, the framed photo from our 10th anniversary on the wall, a frozen moment where his smile looked uncomplicated and mine looked young. I could still hear the echo of his line, "Don't you think things change?" And something inside me hardened into a quiet, icy resolve. But before the plan, there had to be a reckoning with the past, the paths that led us here, the small cuts that prepared me to bleed without noticing. We met 23 years ago at a street fair that smelled like kettle corn and engine grease. Michael was behind a folding table hawking home security systems for the company he just joined. I was helping my friend run the PTA bake sale for her niece's school. He had a salesman's grin but a nervous laugh, and when he asked for a brownie, he said, "Is it wrong that I don't like nuts? Don't judge me." And I didn't. He wrote his number on a napkin and broke two of the brownies in half, like he was negotiating.
Can we do
And
one
I
more
remember
with
thinking
fish?
he had a boyish
Like
charm.
just
I
one
didn't
more.
notice the way he glanced at every passing woman then. I only saw how he looked at me. Our first date was a diner. He arrived with a bouquet of daisies and an apology for the grease on his jacket. "I changed a tire for a woman on the highway," he said, breathless, hair sticking up in a way I found endearing. Heroic entrance optional. I laughed, and he kept telling stories that colored him as the reliable type, the fixer, the man who appeared at the last second to hold the door, to pick up the check, to rescue you from a flat tire and a flat week. "You deserve to be taken care of," he told me that night, reaching across the table to squeeze my fingers. I know how to take care of people. Those words found a home in me. They built a porch, a kitchen, a nursery. After a year, we were engaged. After two, married in a church with white lilies and a rainstorm that chased us to the car in our formal wear, laughing like thieves. He promised me a life where we would be partners, 50-50. He liked to say, though in the same breath he'd slip into chivalry, so polished it blinded me to the math. It didn't feel like a ledger then. It felt like love. The first storm came quietly. We had been married 6 months when his mother, Elaine, moved to our town. "Just for a while," he said. "She's lonely since dad passed." I said yes because it seemed human, because I was raised on casseroles and spare keys for neighbors, because I wanted to be the kind of wife whose compassion confirmed his choice. Elaine smiled at me with thin lips and neat hair and inspected my lasagna like a customs officer. "Sweetheart," she told Michael that first week, as if I weren't there. "She's very independent." As if that were an illness to be managed. It took years for me to realize that independent had been her code for cannot be shaped. "You're lucky to have her," I told myself when she swept into our home with her lemon cleaner and precise critiques. "You'll learn." Learn I did. I learned how Elaine preferred potatoes, never roasted, always mashed. I learned how she said, "or boy," with a little lift of pride that excluded me, like I was a temp worker in her family's firm. I learned the difference between advice and judgment, and how easily one wore the costume of the other. "Michael doesn't like when the bed gets too cluttered with pillows," she commented once, fluffing the four I had arranged on our duvet. "He grew up simple." "He's a simple man." I stood there and smiled and told myself it didn't matter. It was just decoration. But it was also about who named what was too much in our home. And yet, there were good years. We built rituals: Friday night takeout with a movie, Saturday morning pancakes with blueberries when we could afford them, a Sunday drive to look at houses we couldn't buy, narrating the lives we might lead inside them. We tried for children for a long time and failed quietly together. I walked out of clinics with a brave face while he squeezed my hand and said, "It'll happen, babe." When the diagnosis came, unexplained infertility, the doctor's voice folded neatly into the hush of disappointment, and I lost my appetite for words. I saw how it bruised his idea of a life with a son to teach car things and a daughter to protect. "We
Can we
can
do one?
adopt,"
Oh,
I said
this too?
softly, feeling like I
Like
was
just so
offering him
like
a route on a map. He nodded, but he looked toward a horizon I couldn't see. We started paperwork and then didn't finish it. I tucked those forms into a drawer like a story that had fallen asleep. We rescued a beagle named Penny instead. She slept on Michael's feet and loved me like I was enough. Careers were another hinge. I had been a project coordinator at a small nonprofit. Satisfying, if not lucrative. Michael's job was a treadmill with promising inclined sales, then regional manager, then the man whose phone dinged at dinner. "This is just a season," he said when I asked if we could outlaw phones at the table. "Promotions have a runway." I told him I understood. I even did. When my boss announced maternity leave, she asked me to step in temporarily as acting director. "You're the only one who can hold this place," she said. I lit up like a house in December. At home, I explained the schedule, the demands, the thrill. Michael listened for a while, then frowned. "Who's going to be home for the contractor on Tuesday? They're coming to fix the window. And Penny needs a vet appointment." He said it like we were dividing a cake into equal slices, And not like we were standing in the middle of a kitchen I stalked, a life I managed invisibly. I stepped back from the acting role with a polite email full of gratitude and an ache I carried into sleep. Maybe next time, he kissed my forehead. There'll be plenty of next times. He was wrong. Next times are not guaranteed, they are built, brick by brick, the way a woman builds a reservoir of silence. Karen entered our orbit at one of Elaine's casual dinners, which were never casual, always arranged like stages where everyone performed a part Elaine had assigned. Karen was a neighbor of Elaine's friend, invited because she had excellent taste in wine, and, as Elaine put it with a weird smile, a very modern outlook. She had a laugh like crystal and the kind of beauty that isn't content to be observed. It seeks acknowledgement, confirmation. She complimented my dress and then asked if I'd ever tried a different cut that might elongate, motioning vaguely to my waist. She's just being helpful, Michael whispered later as I folded napkins in the kitchen, my throat tight. She works in fashion. What Karen worked in was permission. She and Michael discovered they both liked trail running. I didn't. My knees were bad and my weekends were usually hostage to a dozen small chores that ensured our lives kept humming. The shopping list, the dry cleaning, the little gifts for Elaine's church friends who had birthdays. You should come, Karen told me once as she stretched in our entryway, glancing at my sneakers and then my face. It would be so good for you. The way she clipped you made it sound like a diagnosis. Go, I told Michael, because marriage is made of generous permissions. Have fun. He kissed my cheek and jogged out the door, and I stood there in the sudden quiet, listening to Penny's paws on the floor, telling myself not to be petty, not to be that wife who polices pleasure. At first, it looked like friendship, group runs, group brunches, a camaraderie of sweat and endorphins. I watched for boundaries like a sentry at dusk, and then I talked myself out of my unease because boundaries are easier to erase when you call them no big deal. The truth is, there were 100 small signs I didn't categorize as evidence because I loved him, because I believed loyal was a thing he could not help but be. The laugh he reserved for her stories, the one from our early dating days, returned, the shared photos from trailheads where I wasn't, the inside jokes that skittered across conversation like sparrows you couldn't catch, the text that flashed on his phone during a movie night, you alive, and his quick, guilty tilt of the screen. Karen's hilarious, he said, offering me the shadow of a joke instead of the joke. She's just a friend. I remember nodding while a chamber in my heart took a photograph of that moment for later. It wasn't just Karen. The world trained me over time to doubt my own readings. When I told Elaine that a comment of hers felt unkind, she tilted her head with gentle condescension. Sweetheart, she purred, you're very sensitive. When I expressed being overwhelmed with errands and work, Michael said, you don't have to make everything a crisis. In that way, that pinned the word drama to my chest. The gaslight was ambient. You start to believe you're made of volatile fuel, that everyone else is a competent adult comfortable in the dim, and you alone are flammable. Money, too, came to tell a story. We had a joint account and the courtly gesture of a fun money budget for each of us, which Michael sometimes exceeded because a client dinner ran long or the team hit their quarter and celebrated. When I asked him about a weekend trip he wanted to take to a golf resort, it'll be good for networking. I mentioned the roof fund. You're always worried. He sighed. That's not attractive. I learned to make my desire for prudence sound like a question, not a point of view. I learned how to say, maybe we can wait, like I was not allowed to say no. And I learned the little humiliations of contribution, how my salary became the cute sidekick, the pocket change, the good for extras, while his paycheck was rendered the spine of our life, even though the spreadsheet told a story of my unseen labor's capital gains. One winter, after a small promotion finally came to me, not acting this time, but official, with a title that fit like a warm coat, Michael took me out to celebrate. He reserved a table by the window, ordered a bottle of champagne, and raised his glass. To my wife, he said, the room reflected in his eyes like hundreds of possible lives. To her hard work. I held the glass and let myself be happy in that glittering hour. I might have saved that memory as the proof that we were steady, if not for what happened later that night when we got home. He opened his laptop to check something, quickly, and a message popped up in the corner. You still buzzing from today, Karen. The reply, typed in front of me before he registered my presence, came automatically. You have no idea. He closed the laptop too fast, hand to his mouth, and laughed too lightly like a teenager. She meant her own thing, he said. Work. She got an opportunity. His lie was sloppily wrapped. I was too tired to unwrap it. But that photograph in my heart, click. I became a curator of moments. The way he shaved more frequently. The new cologne he said a client gifted him. The morning he came home from a run and took a longer shower than I had ever known him to take. Humming that same nervous laugh hum from our first date. The business trip he didn't tell me about until the night before. It's just quick, babe, in and out. and the way his eyes slid past mine while he packed. I told myself love is not a detective game, and yet my hands, by habit, started tracing the floor plan of our life for hidden doors. I had my own failings. This is the part of the confession where I'm supposed to say I wasn't perfect, and I wasn't. I could be controlling when stressed, sharp when tired, and defensive when I felt small. Sometimes I made the bed twice because the first time didn't look like the picture in my mind. Sometimes I said, I'm fine, when I was not fine and expected him to decipher the code. But my failings were not betrayals, they were human frictions on a daily gear. His actions were demolition. There were also moments of simple tenderness that confuse the narrative even now. The time I caught a terrible flu and he made me soup from scratch, clumsy and proud, texting his mother for the recipe. The day Penny had a seizure and he cried into her fur with a sound I had never heard from him, a son crying through the mouth of a husband. The night we lay in the backyard under a cheap blanket watching a meteor shower, his arm draped over me, his breath sensing to mine, and he whispered, We've got a good life, like a prayer he believed. Maybe he did. Maybe he believed something he didn't bother to keep true. If I am honest, there were ways he trained me to accept less without ever saying it. The apology after a fight that didn't include the word, sorry. The bouquet after a cruel remark instead of a conversation. The way he dialed up charm in public as if reputation were a solvent for private hurts. If I raised a complaint, he would enlarge my tone until it swallowed my point. You're yelling, he'd say. When I wasn't. You're making a scene. He'd smile when we were alone. By the time I realized what was happening, I had learned to present critiques in miniature small, polite, ignorable. Karen began to occupy more airspace. She texted him articles and selfies and memes that were filtered thirst. I didn't know that at the time, but I knew the way his posture changed when his phone buzzed. He introduced me to her boyfriend at the time, a man with lazy eyes and expensive shoes. And there was a fraction of a second when she placed her hand on Michael's upper back, as if aligning him for a photo only the two of them could see. At a holiday party, I caught them in the doorway of the kitchen sharing a laugh that had some secret scaffolding I wasn't allowed to climb. Inside joke. I asked, breezy as a woman on a magazine cover. Karen tilted her head and smiled with her mouth, not her eyes. Just runner things, she said, and named a hill I'd never climbed. The first time I confronted Michael before the anniversary, it was tentative. Do you think, I started, drying a wine glass carefully, that you and Karen have blurred lines? He looked genuinely baffled. Maybe he was a better actor than I realized then, or maybe he believed his own script. Blurred lines, he repeated, handing me a dish towel like I'd dropped something. We're friends. I thought you liked her. I said, I do. She's charming, and meant half of it. The other half sat on the counter like an unsent letter. I should have sent it. I should have said, I feel you leaving the room even when you're in it. Instead, I said, never mind, and finished the dishes while he scrolled his phone. There was also the matter of Elaine's complicity. She adored Karen. That girl is a breath of fresh air, she declared one afternoon over coffee, folding into our couch like the queen accepting petitions. Such drive, such polish. She glanced at me then, not cruelly, but with a clinical detachment, as if comparing two items on a shelf. You're more domestic, in a good way. She added quickly, as if she had offered me a ribbon. I wondered if she could hear how that word bruised me domestic. I wondered if she knew that while she labeled me with baked goods and steady hands, I kept our books balanced, our home repaired, our taxes filed, our dog alive, our life possible. Domestic is often the code for invisible. On our 19th anniversary, we took a weekend trip to a cabin by a lake. The brochure promised still water and a fireplace. We cooked steaks on a sputtering grill and burned the first batch, laughed, made another. For 24 hours, I let myself believe we were good. He took my photograph at dawn on the dock, hair messy, no makeup, his voice soft. You look like someone I'd marry. I held that sentence like a stone in my pocket. And then, in the car on the way home, his phone buzzed 15 times in an hour, and he said it was the team chat planning for the quarter. When I went to charge his phone that evening, a preview flashed. Karen's, tell me everything when you get a second. Everything. I put the phone down like it had burned me. I told myself married people can have friends who are curious. I was so good at excuses I could have sold them door to door. The night of our 20th anniversary, the night with the white roses and Karen's hand on his thigh, was not a beginning but a culmination. Still, seeing it stole my breath. It is one thing to suspect a storm and another to watch a roof fly. After I confronted him and he slung accusations like kitchen knives, nagging, let yourself go, change. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of our bed and stared at the framed photograph of us cut from a magazine article years ago about local couples who last. We were smiling so wide. I wanted to step into that page and whisper in my own ear, don't let anyone gaslight you into silence. Don't trade your instincts for the comfort of being agreeable. Don't give away the language of your own life. As dawn broke after that sleepless night, I made coffee and fed Penny and watched the sky turn the color of old bruises. Michael came downstairs, showered, dressed in a crisp shirt as if nothing had happened. Early meeting, he said, not meeting my eyes. He poured coffee into a travel mug, kissed the air near my cheek, and left. The front door closed with a click that felt like a verdict. I stood in the hallway and listened to the absence of him. Penny tilted her head like a question mark. I know. I whispered, stroking her ears. I know. I pulled out a notebook, the one I kept for grocery lists and little ideas, and I wrote two columns, what I know and what I don't. Under what I know, I wrote, he is not faithful. His mother aligns with the woman. I am not crazy. I have lost years to softness that didn't protect me. Under what I don't, I wrote how long, how many times, why me, why now, whether to leave. I stared at the list and felt both foolish and powerful. Naming things is a kind of magic. It tells the truth you keep being told is too much. I thought about the ways I had been trained to accept crumbs and call it a feast. I thought about the invitations I had given to my own erasure in the name of harmony. I thought about the version of me who laughed at his jokes in rooms where I wanted to be silent, the version who made his favorite dinner after he snapped at me, the version who styled her pain into politeness. I loved her. She kept us afloat, but she had also partnered with my own diminishment because she believed the alternative was loneliness. I didn't know yet that the worst loneliness is the kind you feel in a room with someone who promises not to leave. Later that day, I took a drive with no destination, just streets I knew and streets I didn't, the city like a storybook I'd read too many times. I found myself at the little park where we used to sit with Penny when she was a puppy, training her to stay. A young couple was there, coaxing a golden retriever to sit. They were laughing in the way you laugh when the world hasn't yet tested your vocabulary for grief. I watched them for a while and let a different kind of resolve settle in, not the movie version with swelling music. A quiet accountant, like resolve. A tallying. In the afternoon, I called my sister. I think he's been cheating, I said, voice flat. I think it's been a long time. She was silent for a beat that stretched. Come over, she said. Now, I drove to her house and sat at her kitchen island while she chopped vegetables aggressively, then apologized to the onion. I don't want to be pitied, I said. I want to be clear. She nodded. So let's get clear. We made another list, not a plan yet, just a ledger of realities. You need access to everything, she said. Passwords, accounts, statements, not to snoop, she added, reading my face. To prepare. The idea that I needed access to my own life made me laugh a little too loud. It's our house, I said. Our money. She looked at me with a softness that registered like a bruise. As it? She asked gently. In practice. That night, Michael came home late. He smelled like someone else's soap. He told me he was exhausted and fell into bed and snored like a man who trusted his roof. I lay beside him, awake again, aware of the millimeter of space between our shoulders like it was a canyon. I remembered the vows to cherish, the way he had said, cherish, at the altar as if he were tasting a rare fruit. I didn't know when he had decided that cherish was negotiable. Maybe he never decided, maybe he just drifted, and drift became destination because no one yelled, sure. I won't pretend I knew then what I would do. I only knew the backstory now had a spine. The girl at the street fair who believed in a good man's promise. The wife who practiced accommodation like an art. The daughter-in-law who accepted judgment disguised as care. The woman who laughed at the right times to hold the room together. The friend who smiled at the woman who would replace her in the center of her own life. I am this woman, I thought, and I am done being her. The next morning, I woke with a sense of mission I hadn't felt in years. I cleaned the house like a controlled burn, clearing drawers, making files, sorting photographs into piles. Keep scanned, put in a box. I found the adoption forms we never finished and cried for what we didn't become, not for what I imagined we were. I fed Penny bits of carrot and listened to a podcast about financial literacy with a focus I once reserved for romantic comedies. When Michael texted at noon, "How's your day?" I looked at the screen for a long time and typed back, "Fine." I needed my quiet. I needed my cover. In the afternoon, I looked again at the photograph of us on our 10th anniversary, the dress I loved, the necklace he bought, the cake my sister baked. On the back, in my handwriting, I had written, halfway to forever. I felt the urge to be cruel to that woman, to make a joke about fractions, to call her knave. Instead, I touched the edge of the frame and said out loud, "Thank you for getting us here. I'll take it from here." If this were a neat parable, the backstory would end with an obvious lever I pulled or a gun placed on a mantel. Life is not theater. But there were tools in the past that I sharpened now, my patience, which had been used against me, but was still mine, my attention to detail, which had been labeled controlling, but could be an asset, my ability to know what a room needed and provide it, which could be inverted into knowing what a man expected and refusing it. The skills that kept a marriage afloat could capsize an affair when applied with precision. I didn't know yet that revenge could be ethical, that it could look like truth served with receipts. All I knew in those days of quiet sorting was that I had been asleep in a house on fire and I had finally woken up. By the end of that week, the world outside looked the same. The neighbors waved. Elaine called to ask if I could bring my famous potato salad to her Saturday luncheon. Michael jogged with Karen at dawn and sent me a selfie of the sunrise like a pacifier. But inside me, the floor plan had changed. Doors I used to knock on, I now closed. Rooms I used to long to enter, I now inspected for exits. Every memory rearranged itself into a schematic where I had conceded, where he had taken, where his charm had been a crowbar, where my grief had been the duct tape that kept our picture frames on the wall. I should say this plainly, I still loved him then. Love doesn't vanish when truth arrives. It shrinks, it hardens, it calcifies into something you can't digest. I loved a version of him that had once existed, the boyish grin at the bake sale, the man crying over the dog, the husband under the meteor shower. Loving that version while living with the current one is like keeping a relic of a saint. You can kiss the glass, but it doesn't bless you anymore. The backstory is not an apology for what I did next. It is the soil, it is the sediment of years that hardened into a surface I could push off from. It is the proof that what was about to happen did not spring from spite alone, but from a long education in the cost of silence. That night, as I closed the curtains and turned off lights, I felt the house hum, not like a trap, but like a machine I finally knew how to operate. Penny curled at my feet, trusting as always. Michael showered, humming that old nervous song. We should have dinner with Karen and her boyfriend soon, he called from the bathroom. It's been a minute. I looked at my reflection in the dark window, saw a woman I recognized and had missed. Sure, I said, steady. Soon I went to bed and, for the first time in days, slept. Not because I had forgiven him, not because I had surrendered, but because I had written the prologue to my own war, and the body, when it knows the story is about to turn, gathers
You do want
strength.
all of
The
this
weeks
too,
after the
like
anniversary
just
dinner
for
blurred into a cruel masquerade. On the surface, nothing had changed. Michael still kissed me on the cheek when he left for work, still left his shoes by the door, still asked if I needed anything when he stopped for gas. But beneath the thin veneer of normalcy, I saw the cracks more clearly than ever. Every smile looked rehearsed. Every excuse reeked of Karen. The first escalation came in the form of absence. Michael began working late more often. Quarterly reviews. He muttered as he loosened his tie one night, dropping his briefcase by the door with a thud. The team's under a lot of pressure. Don't wait up. He kissed my forehead without meeting my eyes. I used to take him at his word. I used to trust. But that night, as the hours dragged by and the clock blinked past midnight, something inside me refused to let the lie pass quietly. I dialed his office line. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. On impulse, I called one of his coworkers, a kind woman named Melissa who had once sent me soup recipes. Oh, Michael, she said, groggy. No, the office closed hours ago. Everyone left by 7. I thanked her, hung up, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair across from me. He came home at 1 in the morning smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. He muttered something about a client dinner, running long, then crawled into bed without noticing the tears drying on my cheeks. The lies multiplied. I have an early meeting tomorrow. I promised the guys I'd help with a late project. Karen asked me to check her car battery. She's hopeless with that stuff. Each excuse was a brick in the wall he was building between us. And every time I questioned him, he turned it back on me. You don't trust me anymore, do you? He snapped one night, slamming his glass onto the counter so hard it cracked. God, you're paranoid. I whispered, because you're lying to me. He rolled his eyes, that cruel little gesture that made me feel smaller than a child. You always want to be the victim. Not everything's about you. Not everything's about you. That phrase lodged itself in my heart like a shard of glass. I had given him 2 decades of my life, my body, my energy, my loyalty, and he had the audacity to tell me not everything was about me. As if betrayal wasn't, as if marriage wasn't, as if love wasn't. The cruelty didn't stop with him. Elaine, the mother in law who had always treated me like a guest in my own home, began showing her hand more openly. She called one morning while Michael was in the shower. Sweetheart, she said sweetly, you mustn't take things so personally. Men stray sometimes. It doesn't mean he doesn't love you. I nearly dropped the phone. You knew, I whispered. She sighed as though I were a child who didn't understand the world. Of course I knew. I'm his mother. I see everything. But you must learn not to drive him away with suspicion. Karen makes him feel young again. Don't begrudge him that. My chest burned. So you think it's fine that I should just smile while he cheats? It's not cheating, she said calmly, as though explaining the weather. It's companionship. You've been married 20 years, dear. Be realistic. I hung up on her. My hands were trembling so violently that the
You do
phone nearly
want
slipped
all
from
of
my
this too,
grasp. Penny
like
whined
just
at
for
my feet, sensing my distress. I knelt and buried my face in her fur, hot tears soaking her coat. Companionship. That's what she called it. The cruelty was sharper because it was dressed as reason, because it made me question if I was the one living in a dream world where vows meant something. The public humiliation soon followed. At a barbecue hosted by one of Michael's colleagues, Karen was there. Of course she was. She wore a sundress that clung to her in all the places she knew men's eyes would linger. She greeted Michael with a kiss on the cheek that lingered too long. And when she turned to me, her smile was almost pitying. You look tired, love, she said sweetly, loud enough for others to hear. You really should join us on the trails. It might energize you. The circle of coworkers laughed lightly, not at me, but near me, the way people laugh when they're unsure if something is cruel but don't want to challenge it. I forced a smile, though inside I felt stripped naked. I'll consider it, I said. Michael put his arm around Karen as they posed for a photo. Not me. Not his wife of 20 years. Her. When the photo was posted on social media the next day, the caption read, "Work family, summer vibes." And there it was, my husband's hand on another woman's waist for the world to see. The next humiliation came in my own home. Elaine invited herself over one evening, bringing Karen with her. I hadn't been warned. I walked into the living room to find Karen perched on the couch, sipping tea from one of my favorite mugs as though she lived there. I thought it would be nice for us girls to bond, Elaine said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Karen looked around my living room as if she were inspecting real estate. You've done a lovely job with the place. So cozy. The word cozy dripped with condescension, as though she were describing a dollhouse. I sat opposite them, gripping my cup so tightly my knuckles turned white. Thank you. Karen smiled, tilting her head. Michael mentioned you don't really join him on runs. That's such a shame. It's such an important part of his life. Elaine nodded. Yes, dear, you mustn't neglect your husband's passions. A man needs a partner who can keep up with him. The implication hit me like a slap. I wasn't enough. I was falling behind. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Not everyone has the same hobbies, I said evenly. Karen giggled. Of course. I just worry he might get bored. The air went still. Elaine didn't protest. She sipped her tea as though Karen had said something perfectly reasonable. That night, when Michael came home, I confronted him again. Why was Karen in my house? I demanded. He shrugged. Mom invited her. Don't be dramatic. As she sat on our couch, she talked about you as if. As if what? He snapped. As if she cares? God, you twist everything into something ugly. Maybe if you were friendlier, people wouldn't feel like they have to walk on eggshells around you. My breath caught. So this is my fault now. His eyes were cold. Everything's always your fault in your head. You invent problems where there aren't any. Gaslighting. Again, always. I went to bed that night shaking, not just from anger, but from the realization that the cruelty was no longer confined to private whispers or hidden touches. It was open, shameless. They were confident enough to sit in my home, to humiliate me in front of others, to look me in the eye and tell me I was the problem. The escalation was complete. The betrayal was no longer a shadow, it was a stage play, and I had been cast as the fool. I began to notice other signs. Receipts in his pockets for dinners he never mentioned, a second phone he kept hidden in his car, whispers on the phone late at night in the garage, his voice hushed but urgent. And yet, every time I questioned him, he turned it on me. You're paranoid. You're insecure. You're imagining things. Until one night he didn't. I found the hotel receipt in his jacket pocket. A two-night stay at a downtown hotel. For two guests. I held it in my hand, my chest heaving, as he walked into the room. What's this? I demanded, my voice shaking. He froze. His eyes flicked from the paper to my face, and for the first time, he didn't even bother to lie. Instead, he smirked. So what if it is what you think it is? My breath caught. You're admitting it. He stepped closer, his tone cruel. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't need to look elsewhere. You're lucky I'm even still here. Those words. Those vile, cutting words. I thought my heart couldn't break anymore, but it did. In that moment, I realized the man I had loved for 20 years was gone. Or maybe he had never existed at all. He left the room, leaving me clutching the receipt like a death certificate. I sat on the edge of the bed, numb. Penny rested her head on my lap, whimpering softly. That was the night I stopped doubting myself. That was the night I stopped asking questions. The escalation was complete. The betrayal wasn't hidden anymore. It was proudly worn, flaunted in my face. And I knew then, with a clarity that shook me to my core, this wouldn't end with tears. This wouldn't end with me walking away quietly. No, this would end with revenge, and he would never see it coming. I didn't cry the night I found the hotel receipt. I thought I would, thought my body would crumple into a wet, pleading thing the way it had so many times before. Instead, something inside me cooled with a steadiness that surprised me. It was like the air at the top of a mountain. Thin, clear, unforgiving. I sat at the edge of our bed, the paper trembling in my hand, and felt the shape of the decision click into place. Not the details yet, just the vow. I will not go quietly. I will not leave empty-handed. I will not ask him to admit what he does not even have the decency to deny. In the morning, I made coffee the way I always did. I even put a cinnamon stick in his mug, a gesture so ordinary it felt like a disguise. He shuffled in with that self satisfied exhaustion, kissed the air somewhere near my cheek, and reached for the cup. I stepped back and set it on the counter, an inch out of reach. Careful, I said softly, and the way his hand hovered, not sure whether he was allowed, told me everything about our new geography. He grunted, grabbed a travel mug, and left. The door closed. The house exhaled. I pulled out a fresh notebook. Not the grocery list book, not the pretty journal with the gold edges. A plain, unassuming spiral from a pack I'd bought at the drugstore. I wrote a title at the top of the first page in small, neat letters: July Project. The month was wrong. It wasn't July, but I liked the blandness of it. It looked like planning a garage clean out or a pantry reorg. I dated the corner. Then I drew 3 boxes and labeled them evidence, money stage. Evidence first, because truth is a currency, and I had spent too many years paying with doubt. I didn't need spycraft, I needed preservation. Screenshots are a woman's safety deposit box. I backed up my phone and our shared laptop to an external drive I'd been meaning to use. I forwarded bills to my personal email, the one I used when coupons felt like self care, and quietly changed the recovery address on my own accounts. I made a list of every place our life left a footprint: bank statements, credit card rewards, hotel loyalty programs, the running app he and Karen used to brag about their endurance, the cloud where he stored photographs with optimistic file names like Q3 JPG, and Client Lunch 1. I wasn't looking for a smoking gun anymore. I had held it in my hand last night. I was writing a chorus so loud no one could pretend not to hear. I bought a little binder at the office supply store, navy, polite, forgettable, and a stack of plastic sleeves. Each page got a date and a label, receipts with lipstick on the line for 2 entrees, duplicate Uber charges from the same night, one from our house to downtown, one from downtown to Karen's neighborhood, 12 minutes apart, a hotel booking under his name, and a points transfer to a family and friends account with a username so transparent I actually laughed. RunGirl54. I wasn't a detective, I was an archivist. I wrote notes in the margins the way you do for a book club when you want to make sure you can find the good parts later. I refused to break the law for him. I would not tap his phone or record him without consent or install spyware like the true crime podcasts whisper about. My revenge would not be thrown out on a technicality. I wasn't going for handcuffs, I was going for consequences. So I looked at what was visible, what was public, what was already mine to collect. People forget how much they confess just by living sloppily. He had been sloppy for so long he thought it was style. Then money, this was the one that made my hands sweat. I had always been responsible, the one who knew when the water bill auto drafted and when the insurance renewed, the one who kept a spreadsheet with tabs for household and savings and own pleasant surprises. Responsibility is a religion women are born into. But I had been pious in a church where he skimmed the collection plate, so I turned my responsibility into an instrument. I sat down with the spreadsheet and added a new tab: contingencies. It had columns for assets, liabilities, recurring transfers, and what I privately named her exposure. Any place he could hurt me if he decided to get creative. I opened an account in my name at a credit union I had used a lifetime ago. I transferred an amount that was both fair and defensible. Half of the liquid savings that were joint and not earmarked for anything specific. I left a clear, documented trail. Note in the memo line: 50% of household savings per reconciliation on Tate. I printed that transfer confirmation and slid it into the front of the binder. I tried to ignore how my heart pounded like I was stealing from a store where I'd worked for 20 years without a raise. I froze the extra cards, the ones we told ourselves were for emergencies, but had slowly become his runway for client fun. I left the primary card active because I wanted to watch him spend. If he had to choose between a hotel suite and a new set of golf clubs, I wanted to see his priorities bloom in numbers and merchant codes. I called our insurance agent and asked neutral questions about policies, beneficiaries, and what happens the event of a separation. The agent's voice adopted a tone that lives somewhere between empathy and sales. I adopted my organized woman, voice low, calm, uninterested in pity, and then stage revenge. I realized is theater. It requires timing, blocking, a set, an audience. I wasn't going to scream in a parking lot or throw drinks at a restaurant. I wanted his story to collapse in the place where he told it best. He loved to perform steadiness. He loved to be the man people envied for his loyalty, his nice house, his cute dog, his wife who gets it. I didn't intend to ruin him. I intended to reveal him. I would build a stage with every prop in place: family, friends, colleagues, a cake if it served me, and then I would pull the scrim. But to do that, I needed allies. Not an army, just a few people who would stand still when the wind changed. I called my sister and told her I was done harvesting tears. I want to do this without turning into the thing they say I am, I said. I need the kind of help that doesn't feel like help. That feels like structure. She came over with a tote bag full of snacks and legal pads. We sat at my kitchen table and drew columns like we used to draw hopscotch squares on the sidewalk. She wrote names without commentary: Elaine, predictably hostile; Melissa from his office, kind, observant; Karen's boyfriend, X, whatever's unknown variable; our neighbor who hears everything useful, if aimed gently. We don't need witnesses to the act, she said, tapping the page. We need witnesses to the aftermath. People who will say, I saw her be steady. I made an appointment with a lawyer whose card had been magnet ed to our fridge for years under the pretense of state planning someday. Her name was Maya, and she had a liquid gaze that made people underestimate her until it was inconvenient. I told her everything, not dramatized, just lined up like soldiers. She started asking questions I didn't know to ask. Whose name is on the deed? How long has the 401k been funded? Any cash gifts from his mother that exceeded the annual limit? Any debts you didn't sign for? My confidence wavered. I could set a table for 12 with wooden chairs and white roses, and I could keep a home humming like a machine. But there were economies in the background I had allowed him to narrate. I felt stupid for a minute, and then I felt angry at the way these systems require women to be both tender and forensic. Maya wrote 2 lists. Here's what you're entitled to, she said, and her voice gave me back the ground under my feet. Here's what is strategic. They are not always the same, and we will decide which column serves you. She pushed a blank sheet toward me. Here's homework. Stop apologizing in email. Women document their own guilt with politeness. Be concise, be kind, but not performative. Assume every sentence you write will be read in a room where someone wants to misunderstand you. I wanted to hug her and also ask her to teach a class to every woman I loved. On the way home, I stopped at the park where the younger versions of me had taken Penny to learn stay. I practiced the word out loud. Stay. Stay steady. Stay quiet for now. When I pulled into the driveway, Michael's car was already there. Karen's text preview lit up his dashboard. Tonight, same place. I stood on the path for a full minute watching the soft blue rectangle glow and go dark and glow again, like the smallest lighthouse calling a ship that had already decided land was boring. He cooked that night, pasta carbonara in a pan too small, bacon grease popping like insults. I set the table, put out napkins, poured wine. We played house. Long day. I asked, and my voice didn't tremble. You have no idea, he said, twirling noodles like triumph. We're killing it this quarter. We, I repeated, and my mouth almost smiled. I invited Elaine to dinner the following week. It was my sister's idea. You can't let her keep playing Queen in Exile, she said. Bring her on stage before she writes the play. So I did. I set the table with the silverware from our wedding day, tarnish polished out until it gleamed like something new. I put white roses in the center because symbols are weapons if you hold them right. Elaine arrived in one of her neutrals, Karen at her side like an accessory. So cozy, Karen said as if practicing a role. You have such a gift for making things sweet. I could hear the word she didn't say: small. We ate roast chicken and potatoes mashed the way Elaine preferred. We talked about nothing. I counted to 10 after every sentence, training my breath to outlast the petty insults. Halfway through, Elaine dabbed her lips and said, I do hope we can be adults about everything. We are, I said, and Karen's gaze flicked up, just for a second, like prey sensing a shadow. I want the best for Michael. Elaine continued, as if reading from a family creed. He has so much ahead of him. He needs clarity. I set my fork down. Clarity's coming, I said. Soon. After they left, Michael cornered me in the kitchen. What did that mean? He demanded. What did you say to my mother? Ask her, I said. I wanted him to sweat into the thatch of lies he'd woven like it was a weighted blanket. He grabbed the edge of the counter hard enough to make the wood creak. You're not going to embarrass me, he said, and for the first time there was a sliver of fear in the bravado. It warmed me like a sip of something expensive. Michael, I said softly, I would never embarrass you. He blinked, suspicious of kindness. I'm going to tell the truth. Allies arrive in unexpected packaging. 2 days later, Karen's ex, his name was Drew, sent me a message on social media. We were not friends. His profile was curated indifference, travel photos, espresso, the occasional gym mirror apology. The message was one line: if you ever want to compare notes, I'm around. I stared at it for a long time, then I wrote back: coffee, public place. Wednesday. He sent a thumbs up, then an address to a spot near the river where cyclists argued about gears. Drew was handsomer in person in the way that doesn't matter because his eyes looked like someone who had misplaced his compass. We sat with our cups between us like evidence. He didn't waste my time. She cheated on me with him, he said, and the relief in naming it was a language I spoke. I found text idiotic stuff, like high school, but worse because they have money in calendars. I nodded. He told me about nights alone, about explanations that sounded like he was being graded on his questions, about apologies that came packaged with accusations. You know the type, he said, and I said, oh, intimately. He had a folder on his phone, screenshots he hadn't known what to do with. He slid it across the table like a sacrament. You can send them to yourself, he said. I blocked them both. I'm done. I looked through the messages. Pet names like crumbs, logistics like choreography, a photograph that made my jaw clench not because of skin, but because of the familiarity of the hotel curtains in the background. I sent them to a fresh email account I had created for the binder with an address so dull it erased itself as soon as you read it. Then I looked up at him and said, Thank you. He shrugged, but his throat worked. Make it count. He said, I'm tired of men like him winning because women like you are polite. Amaya, my lawyer, read every new page of the binder as if it were a short story she was editing for clarity. You're building a beautiful case for moral authority, she said drily. But remember, the law is a blunt instrument.
Can we do one?
Use
Oh,
your
edit
leverage
to
where it
it,
will be
like
understood,
just a little
money and
slight.
narrative. The people you want to reach don't care about adjectives. They care about consequences. She slid a document across her desk. Here's a separation agreement drafted with contingencies. You don't have to use it yet, but if he tries to turn the room against you when you perform your little play, she smiled without softness. You have a script ready for Act TY. I read the typed lines and felt my ribs loosen around my heart. Every morning I practiced normal. That was the hardest part, wearing the costume of a wife whose photographs still matched her life. I stopped commenting on his hours. I stopped asking who was on his team at late dinners. If he lied, I let it fall between us like a paper napkin. I learned to make neutral noises when he bragged. He grew comfortable again because comfort is a man's default when a woman goes quiet. He misread my stillness as surrender. He forgot that a lake can look like glass until it swallows the dock. And then I set the stage. It was his idea. Almost. He loved a party thrown in his honor, but he loved more the idea that he didn't ask for it. I suggested we host a summer gratitude dinner, not for our marriage, not that on the nose, but for friends and family who have supported us this year. It was a phrase with just enough vagueness for everyone to project their own goodness onto it. He lit up the way men do when they imagine themselves as protagonists in other people's speeches. Wu could cater, he said, already mentally drafting a menu he would never read. Wu could do it on the pay show. He texted a group thread. Elaine answered like she had been waiting in the wings. Karen Hart reacted and wrote, I'll bring wine. Of course she would. I rented a few round tables and a portable bar. I ordered exactly enough food for comfort and not enough for distraction. I printed place cards with names in my neatest hand. I put white roses in low bowls because I wanted eyes on each other, not on the flowers. I made a playlist of old songs the couples would hum to and new ones the younger friends would ask about. I sliced lemon bars the way Michael liked, the way Karen didn't know he did. The afternoon unfolded under a sky so mild it felt like consent. I had a plan inside the plan, and it required one more piece. Melissa, the kind coworker with the soup recipes. I invited her and her wife and asked, casually, if the head of Michael's department might want to stop by, just for a glass, no pressure. He thinks the world of Michael, I said, and she smiled. He thinks the world of everyone until he doesn't, she said, and I tucked that away. I asked my sister to be on coat duty at the beginning so she'd know who came and who slipped away and who lingered where they shouldn't. I asked Drew to swing by near the end with an envelope. He hesitated. This isn't my world, he said. It wasn't mine either, I told him. And then they stole it and wore it like a coat. He nodded. The night arrived. People floated in with the energy of a favorite sitcom's reunion episode. Elaine wore pearls you could see from the driveway. She kissed the air by my face and whispered, so gracious of you, like magnanimity belonged to her by birthright, and I was just borrowing it. Karen came in a dress the color of apology and no
Can we
bra,
do one?
her
Oh,
perfume
edit
arriving
to
at the
it,
door before
like
she
just a
did.
little like.
You look amazing, she told me, eyes scanning for a flaw the way a TSA agent scans for liquids. So cozy, she added, as if she had practiced. Michael worked the pay show like a politician, hand to shoulder, private jokes, the gentle flex of a man whose story had never been audited. He clinked a glass and said a few words about community and gratitude and the kind of love that grows with time. I almost admired the craft. People murmured in agreement. He put his arm around my waist while he spoke, fingers resting just above the scar from the surgery we had done to find out why my body couldn't hold a child. Touch is a language. His translation felt counterfeit. I let it all happen. I let them get comfortable until the light went that soft honey that makes even bad decisions look pretty. And then I took the stage I had built, not a speech. People brace for speeches at gratitude dinners, but a toast small and unassuming, glass raised, smile bright. Thank you for coming, I said. Truly, you are the people who have held our lives together in big ways and small, and I wanted to hold you here for a moment to say it out loud. Heads tilted, smiles ready. I want to thank my husband. I continued, turning slightly toward Michael, who performed humble like a man who'd paid for the class. 20 years is a long time to learn another person's language. Some words are easy, some are advanced. A ripple of laughter. This year I learned a new one. Clarity. Elaine's eyes sharpened. Karen's glass paused midair. Michael's fingertips tightened on my waist and then loosened as if unsure which gesture the audience would like better. Clarity. I repeated, about who we are when no one's watching, about the stories we tell other people and the stories we live, about what vows mean after the flowers are compost. I'm grateful for clarity even when it arrives like thunder. I set my glass down. So I made a little scrapbook. I held up the navy binder, the one that could have been recipes. I thought we could pass it around like we do with baby photos and wedding albums. I've collected moments from this year, receipts for dinners I didn't attend, hotel confirmations I didn't receive, messages with pet names I didn't answer. A sound went through the patio like a flock lifting off all at once. You can flip to any page, I said lightly. The story is consistent. Michael laughed. Too loud? Too bright? Babe, he said, reaching for the binder with a smile engineered for bystanders. You're being dramatic. I kept it an inch out of reach, the way I had with the cinnamon. Oh, love, I said softly. I'm being very calm. I handed the binder not to him, but to Melissa, whose eyebrows had already risen to the horizon. You might start at October, I suggested. That was a busy month for the team. Karen set her glass down and stood. This is wildly inappropriate, she hissed, cheeks high with a flush that finally told the truth on her face. Elaine shot to her feet, too, pearls like bullets. How dare you? She whispered at me, the whisper sharper than any shout. In your home, I said and smiled. In my home. I dare quite a bit. Michael moved closer, jaw clenched, charm gone like a curtain yanked off a window. You will stop this? He said, voice low enough for only me. You will ruin everything. I tilted my head. Maybe everything needed inspection. He reached for the binder again. Someone else's hand, my sister's, landed on it first. Sit, she said to him, the way you speak to a dog too beloved to be humiliated but too undisciplined to be trusted. He sat because the room wasn't only mine anymore. It was ours. I didn't read from the pages. I didn't need to. The murmur around the tables did the work, photos of sunrise runs that ended at a hotel, restaurant charges for two that lined up with nights I'd eaten alone, a message thread where the two of them giggled about practicing ulibis, followed by a selfie in a bathroom mirror I recognized. Karen took a step toward me, then another, like she was going to touch my arm the way women do when they want to force intimacy back into a scene. I took a step back. Don't, I said. You've been close enough to my life. Drew arrived at the gate, then punctual like salvation. He held an envelope. You must be lost. Michael sneered. This is private. You're a public man, Drew said mildly and handed the envelope to Melissa, who had the sense to open it over the binder. Inside were printouts of the messages he'd shown me at the river, dates, times, emojis that looked obscene in the context of the vows we had actually said to each other once. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, oh my God. Elaine's hand flew to her chest in a theater gesture I'd seen her practice at funerals she wasn't sad about. Michael stood, all at once, chair legs scraping. Enough, he barked. You're all vultures. This is between my wife and me. He looked at me then, the old plea flickering. We can talk about this privately. I shook my head. You made it public. Every time you held her waist for photographs. Every time you lied to our friends and asked me to bring potato salad to your mistress's charm school. I felt the room's anger cock its head toward me, and I held up a hand. Don't make a feast of this. Just look, see, and then remember. I turned toward the portable bar, set my empty glass down, and let the silence grow just long enough to make the point. Then I said, very clearly, there are envelopes on the table by the door. Head swiveled. They contain a copy of what you've seen tonight, a note from me. And, for those of you who need it, a resource list for lawyers and therapists. Affairs are contagious. I don't wish this flu on anyone. If you're here, it means you matter to us. I expect you to go home and wash your hands. A laugh burst out of me then, surprising even me. It broke the tension just a hair. People stood up in twos and threes out of mercy for themselves. Karen moved toward the gate like someone who had just remembered a pot on the stove. Elaine stayed rigid, staring at me with a fury that could have powered her house for winter. You have ruined him, she said. No, I answered, picking up a plate and walking it to the kitchen, because the night still required small obediences. He did the work. I just turned on the lights. Back inside, in the quiet aftermath of departing sandals and murmured apologies and chairs being straightened by people who needed an action, he followed me. You vindictive, he began, and I turned. Don't finish that sentence, I said. You'll hear it again in a room where it matters. I wiped the counter. I put leftover chicken in a container because even justice has to be refrigerated. I have a separation agreement ready. I added, almost conversational. It's fair, it's cleaner if you sign. If you don't, Maya will enjoy the exercise. He stared at me like I was speaking a language he hadn't bothered to learn. You planned this? He said, awed despite himself. You've been planning this? Ever since you told me companionship wasn't cheating, I said, and the word tasted like tinfoil in my mouth. He opened his mouth, closed it. I can fix this, he said, the old promise, the first trick he ever sold me. You don't know how, I said gently, and realized I meant it without venom. He had broken something he didn't know how to build. He had always been better at entrances. When he finally left, for a hotel he would pay for with a card that would send me an alert, I stood in the kitchen and listened to the house hum again. Penny curled at my feet. I bent and buried my face in her fur and exhaled. Not victory. Not yet. The hard part was coming, the forms and the fury and the hours where people would test the edges of my story to see where it tore. But the turning point had happened. Not at the party, not even at the hotel receipt. It had happened weeks ago. In the quiet morning when I wrote July project in small letters and decided not to ask for his permission to breathe. I washed the last glass. I turned off the porch light. My phone buzzed with messages. Sister, proud of you. Melissa, here if you need HRIS, a number I didn't recognize. You don't know me, but thank you. Elaine's text came last. You have no idea what you've done. I typed and erased a dozen drafts. Then I sent clarity. Before bed, I put the navy binder on the top shelf of the hall closet, not to hide it. To crown it, it was the book of a language I'd learned the hard way, a grammar of boundaries, a syntax of receipts. I turned off the lamp and lay down in a bed that, for the first time in months, did not feel like a stranger's. I could still smell Karen's perfume, maybe just in my head, or maybe in the fibers of a chair I would one day send to a thrift store, but beneath it, faint and stubborn, was the cinnamon from the morning, the 1 inch I had kept for myself. Clarity. I whispered into the dark. Clarity, clarity. Penny sighed a small exhale of agreement. In the morning, I would call Maya and set appointments. I would email the credit union and ask a quiet question. I would text my sister and ask her to come over with legal pads again because there were notes to be sorted, storage unit, safety deposit box, the utilities list, the streaming services he'd added under dummy emails to dodge fees. I would take the framed photograph from our 10th anniversary off the wall and put it in a box, not because I hated it, but because I needed blank spaces where the future could hang. But that night, the turning point finished turning. It clicked into place with the certainty of a bolt sliding home. Not rage, not even triumph, something colder, cleaner. The feeling of a door closing to a room you had outgrown, the click so satisfying you don't mind the echo. Revenge isn't loud at first. It doesn't begin with fireworks or slammed doors. It starts in the quiet, in the places where planning looks like patience. By the time the party had ended and the binder had made its rounds, the fuse was already lit. All I had to do now was watch him walk into his own ruin. The first stage of my revenge was not meant for him. It was meant for me. I had to reclaim the story. For 20 years, Michael had controlled the narrative of our marriage with charm, excuses, and gaslighting. If I left without making my voice louder than his lies, the world would remember me as the bitter wife who couldn't keep her man. No, my revenge would be justice disguised as truth telling, and truth telling needed an audience. 3 days after the dinner, I invited Elaine to coffee. Not at my house, never again, but at a cafe downtown where the walls echoed with other people's laughter. She walked in with her pearls chin high like a queen inspecting enemy territory. You embarrassed Michael. She hissed as soon as she sat down. I stirred my coffee slowly. No, Elaine. I clarified Michael, her lips pressed into a thin line. He's devastated. He says you ambushed him. He says a lot of things. I interrupted, finally meeting her eyes. That's the problem. But what I showed wasn't words. It was facts. You've ruined his reputation, she snapped. I leaned forward. Elaine, you've spent years making me the villain in his story. You whispered in his ear that I wasn't enough, that I didn't keep up. You championed Karen while she shared my husband's bed. And now you want me to protect his reputation? She faltered just for a second, and I saw it, the flicker of doubt, the realization that she had underestimated me. I'm not protecting him anymore, I said calmly. I'm protecting myself. I slid a sealed envelope across the table. She blinked. What's this? Copies of everything you saw at the dinner, in case you feel tempted to spin a new story. Her hand trembled slightly as she pushed it back toward me. You're cruel. No, I whispered. I'm thorough. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back, and left without finishing her tea. I sat there, sipping my coffee slowly, savoring the taste of control. The second stage required precision. I scheduled a meeting with Michael's HR department, not to scream or throw accusations, but to quietly deliver documentation. Melissa had already hinted that upper management had suspicions. All they needed was confirmation. I walked into the glass-walled office with my navy binder, wearing my calmest smile. I just thought you should know, I said, sliding the pages across the desk. Your manager has been using company resources to fund personal activities. Hotel stays billed during supposed client dinners, expenses submitted under vague categories that line up with nights he wasn't actually working. The HR director flipped through the binder, her eyes widening. This is detailed. I'm very detail oriented, I said softly. By the time I left, I didn't need to imagine the outcome. HR doesn't move fast, but they move decisively when reputation is at stake. The man who thought he could balance work and adultery on the same calendar was about to learn that employers don't like funding affairs. The third stage was for Karen. I waited until she was alone, until Michael was busy scrambling to control the fallout at work. Then I called her. My voice was steady, even kind. Karen, it's me. A pause. Then a soft laugh. Oh, hello. Brave of you to call. I wanted to thank you, I said simply. For what? For showing me who my husband really was? Silence. You think this hurts me? Please. Michael and I are over. I cut in smoothly. You're over. You just don't know it yet. HR has everything. His colleagues know. His family knows. You've tied yourself to a sinking ship. Her laugh faltered. He told me you'd beg, that you'd cry, that you'd. Begging is for women who don't have a plan? I interrupted. I don't beg. I build stages. And I just burned the curtain you were hiding behind. Her breath caught. You're insane. No, I said softly. I'm free. I hung up before she could answer. The fourth stage was personal. Michael came home late one night, his tie loose, his face pale. He found me at the dining table, calmly sorting through papers. What are you doing? He demanded. Separating what's mine from what's yours, I said evenly. You'll find your clothes in the guest room. I'd appreciate it if you slept there until the papers are finalized. He slammed his fist on the table. You think you can just throw me out of my own house? Our house, I corrected. And yes, I can. His face twisted with rage. You'll regret this. No one's going to believe you. Everyone knows you're sensitive. I finished for him. Paranoid, dramatic, funny, Michael. Those words don't sound the same after people see receipts. I slid a copy of the binder across the table. He stared at it like it was poison. I'm done arguing, I said softly. Sign the separation agreement. It's fair. If you don't, I'll see you in court and you'll lose more than money. He sneered. You're bluffing, am I? I whispered. His eyes flicked to the binder again, and for the first time I saw fear in his gaze. Real fear. The fallout spread faster than I could have imagined. Within a week, whispers about Michael's unprofessional behavior circulated at his office. Within two, HR put him on leave pending investigation. His colleagues, once his drinking buddies, avoided his calls. The man who loved being envied was now the subject of pity and scorn. Elaine stopped calling, maybe out of shame, maybe out of fury. Either way, her silence was a victory in itself. Karen vanished from our social circle, deleted her accounts, stopped showing up at the runs, stopped answering calls. She'd gambled on a man who had nothing left to give. And Michael, my husband, my betrayer, sat in the guest room night after night, his world shrinking around him. I could hear him pacing, muttering into his phone, trying to salvage what couldn't be salvaged. One night, he stormed into the kitchen. Are you happy now? He demanded. I looked up from my tea. Getting there, his face reddened. You ruined me. You ruined everything. I set my cup down. No, Michael, you ruined us. I just stopped covering for you. He glared at me for a long moment, then turned and stormed back upstairs. Penny trotted in, wagging her tail, and I knelt to hug her. We're almost done, I whispered. Almost free. Revenge needed one last flourish, a finale so undeniable that even Michael couldn't rewrite it. I planned it for the day we signed the papers. We sat in Maya's office. The agreement spread out on the polished desk. He looked gaunt, his once slick confidence replaced by bitterness. This is robbery, he muttered, flipping through the pages. This is justice, Maya corrected smoothly. He hesitated, then scrawled his signature. The sound of pen on paper was more satisfying than any scream. As he slid the documents back across the desk, I leaned forward. One last thing? He looked up warily. What now? I pulled out the framed photo from our 10th anniversary, the one where we looked so happy, so unbreakable. I set it gently on the desk between us. Halfway to forever, I reminded him, quoting the note I'd once written on the back. His jaw tightened. You're cruel. No, I whispered, standing. I'm free. I left him there, staring at the photograph, the ghost of the life he had destroyed reflected in the glass. That night, I cooked myself a simple dinner. Salmon, asparagus, a glass of wine. I ate at the dining table alone, but I didn't feel lonely. Penny sat at my feet, content. The house was quiet, but it was mine again. Revenge hadn't been about destroying him. It had been about reclaiming me, about proving that I was not paranoid, not dramatic, not too sensitive. I was clear. I was steady. I was done. And as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan tracing its endless circles, I smiled for the first time in months. The revenge was complete, and he never saw it coming. I didn't sleep the night after he signed. I didn't stay awake either. I hovered in that strange middle place where the body is still and the mind wanders through rooms, turning off lights it forgot were on. At some point, the house sighed, the kind of sound you only notice when you've been listening for months. I realized it wasn't the house. It was me. The first morning of my new life did not arrive with trumpets. It came with a grocery list: milk, lemons, dog food. I stood in the aisle, hand on a bag of Penny's favorite kibble, and felt an unexpected wave of gratitude for the stupid ordinariness of being the only person responsible for the cart. No performance, no pretending a text wasn't whispering from a pocket, no bracing for the creak of the garage door and the lie that came with it. Just me choosing apples with bruises I could see. News travels the way water finds a path. Within days, it had seeped through every crack in the social ground. We were separated. There had been an affair. I had made a scene. The polite phrase for telling the truth in public. Some people sent roses, some sent questions, some sent nothing because uncertainty makes people superstitious. Melissa left a casserole on my porch with a note that said simply, "You were not crazy, you were correct." My sister texted me jokes at odd hours, as if laughter could be administered like an IV to a patient who'd lost too much blood. Elaine sent one message that read, "You've humiliated the family." And I replied, "The family did that to itself." After that, she went quiet and her silence felt like a drawer I finally didn't have to open. Michael tried to call the first week, twice. The first time I let it ring until his name stopped flashing like an emergency I wasn't obligated to respond to. The second time I answered, he said my name the way people say grace, hungry, unpracticed. He told me HR had overreacted, that his leave was temporary, that the problem wasn't what he did but how I presented it. I listened like a doctor listens to symptoms they already know the diagnosis for. When he paused, I said, "I hope you learned something." It landed like a dull coin on a table that had seen too many pretty promises. He exhaled, and for a second I heard the boy from the street fair again, the one who didn't know how to end a story he had started. "We could try counseling," he offered, as if the word were a spare key under a mat. "We could," I said. "But we won't." I hung up, blocked his number, and slid my phone to the far side of the table. It didn't vibrate again. The stillness felt like a room that had finally been vacuumed after years of crumbs. The practical aftermath was less poetic. I sat with Maya and signed things that sounded like they had been named by people who never once had to sit in their car outside a pharmacy because the world's fluorescent lights were too bright for the day they were living. Quitclaim deed, QDRO, allocation schedules. She translated, I initialed. We paused once when a number on a page made my throat close. "I keep thinking about what could have been if I hadn't stepped back all those times," I said. "The acting job, the trip we never took, the adoption forms in a drawer." Maya leaned back, steepling her fingers. "Grief is an auditor," she said. "It counts what's missing. And then one day, if you let it, it starts counting what's present." She slid a pen toward me. "You're doing beautifully." I didn't feel beautiful, but I felt competent, which was better. I cleaned. Not in a rage. Those come with their own hangovers, but with a slow reverence for objects that deserve the decency of a fresh context. I washed the guest room sheets and folded them into a box marked linens, without thinking about the nights he had slept on them with a conscience that didn't keep him up. I took down the photograph from our 10th anniversary and replaced it with a print of the lake we'd once visited when I believed in meteor showers as a language only we spoke. The print had no people in it, just water and the suggestion of depth. I donated the shirt he loved that I hated. I kept the navy binder. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I placed it at the back of the closet behind the winter boots, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I liked knowing the story could be put away without being forgotten. I started going to the park again. Penny trotted like she was reading a familiar book out loud. On the third day, a woman I recognized from the neighborhood sat beside me on the bench and began to cry. "I'm sorry," she said, embarrassed. "It's just what you did at that dinner. No one ever says it out loud like that." I didn't know where to look. At her hands, at the trees, at my own knees. Wasn't brave, I said, though maybe it was. It was necessary. She wiped her face and laughed. "I might need necessary," she said. "I might need it soon." We exchanged numbers, not a friendship yet, a witness exchange. Karen left town. Or so a run club acquaintance told my sister, who told me carefully, "The way you tell someone their bully has transferred schools." The acquaintance said something about job in another city and clean slate. I drove by the trailhead once at sunrise, not because I wanted to see her, but because that was the hour the two of them had made into their ritual. The fog was so low it felt like mercy, and the path was empty. I stood there and listened to the gravel under my shoes. I tried to make space for the part of me that wanted to hate her more than him, because that hatred felt easier, familiar, like an old coat. Then I called hatred by its middle name, distraction, and walked Penny until the day warmed. Work changed tone too. The nonprofit that had once asked me to be acting director called me with a grant project that needed a leader yesterday. "We remember," my former boss said. "We remember who kept this place standing." I almost said no out of old habit. The part of me that still referenced chore charts and veterinary appointments and all the invisible obligations that had burrowed under my skin like fixtures. Instead, I inhaled and treated the inhalation like a vote. Yes, I said. The first week, I printed an agenda with my name at the top and held the paper in both hands like a fragile animal. It did not bite. It sat there patient as if it had been waiting for me. There were days I missed him. Not the man from the hotel receipts, the boy at the bake sale who didn't like nuts, the man who cried over Penny's seizure, the husband under the meteor shower. Grief is arrogant. It insists on its right to show up even when your enemy deserves no
You could do
monument.
one
On
over
those
this
days,
too,
I gave Grief a
like this
chair,
one,
but
like
not the head of the table. I cooked a meal he used to love and ate it slowly in silence, then washed the plate and put it away. I told myself you loved, and you ended it when love stopped telling the truth. Both things can live in the same body without tearing it apart. The money came through like weather. Some days sunny, some days spitting. I learned how to read statements the way I once read grocery ads. I set up automatic transfers to accounts with names that felt like Amulet's safety future porch light. I paid the insurance on time. I marveled at how much less a month cost when you weren't funding someone else's alibis. I spent an afternoon with an accountant who wore suspenders and spoke to me like a partner. When he finished explaining something that once would have sent me text hunting for words like APR, he looked at me over his glasses and said, you're good at this. I laughed. I was always good at this, I said. I just wasn't allowed to call it anything but chores. One evening, I found the adoption forms in the drawer where paper clips and grief had made their nest. I sat on the floor and read them the way you read old letters from a self you still love but wouldn't recognize in a crowd. I didn't cry. I didn't promise myself anything either. I put them in a folder labeled someday, then laughed because someday is the slipperiest day on the calendar. I relabeled the folder EEF. It felt honest. It also felt generous. People ask for neat endings. They want the villain to trip on the same step he built, the heroine to stand on the porch and watch the sun choose her on purpose. Life gave me something less tidy and more satisfying. He didn't lose everything. Men like him rarely do. He lost the job he bragged about, but found another with a lower title in a smaller company where no one knew the way he used to walk through hallways like they were runways. He didn't marry Karen. I heard he tried and she declined, not because she found a new ethic, but because the currency she wanted to spend changed denominations. Elaine moved closer to a cousin and joined a church where people hugged too much and gossiped more. Sometimes, when I buy potatoes, I think of how she liked them mashed and let the thought pass through me like a storm that lost interest. The city remained the same in ways that felt like a dare. The coffee shop where I gave Elaine the envelope still made cappuccinos with hearts I sometimes failed to see. The barbecue house where Michael took photos with his arm around someone else's waist still grilled 2 sweet ribs. The street fair returned, and I walked through it with my sister. And when a man behind a folding table offered me a free pen and a pitch I would have once leaned toward, I smiled and said, "No, thank you," in a voice that sounded like a person who knows what she needs. We bought brownies. I let mine have nuts. I learned new rituals. Saturday mornings weren't pancakes anymore. They were farmers' markets with cash in an envelope and flowers I didn't choose for their symbolism, but because they would open slowly and keep me company without asking for anything. I bought dahlias that looked like fireworks and stuck them in an old jar. I took a ceramics class and made a bowl with a wobble so honest I put it in the center of the table like a thesis.
can
I
we do one
ran,
of
not
this
on
too,
trails that belonged to
like this
ghosts,
one,
but
like
around the track at the high school at dusk, when kids with headphones and old men with opinions kept me from pretending it was noble to be alone. My knees held. My lungs made an agreement with me I hadn't asked for. Sometimes I thought about Karen's voice, the way she had said energize you, and I laughed out loud, the sound of someone who had reclaimed a word and sent it back wearing her lipstick. There were offers. A coworker's friend who liked jazz and made a spectacular coq au vin that he could talk about without making it a sermon. A graphic designer with a smile I didn't trust because it reminded me of salesmen. A widower who asked me to go to a lecture about city planning and made endearing noises when the speaker used acronyms. I said yes to the lecture and no to the cocoa au vin and maybe to the jazz because my body did not want to be made into a curriculum again. The widower walked me to my car afterward and said, "I'm slow." "So am I said. "We can be slow in parallel. We didn't kiss. We also might never." The possibility felt like a room with windows. The most surprising aftermath was gentleness toward myself, toward the version of me who stayed quiet for so long because she believed love required swallowing your own language. I stopped bullying her in my head. I started thanking her for building a home steady enough to survive a demolition. When I caught myself rehearsing the party, what I should have said to Elaine, how I might have crafted the toast into a cleaner blade, I told myself to leave the stage and come sit at the table. The show was over. The audience had gone home. The point of a performance is not to perform it forever. One afternoon, months later, I saw Michael at the hardware store. He had a basket with light bulbs and a broom and a look I recognized, the expression of a man concentrating on small improvements because big ones felt unavailable. He saw me and froze. Then he did something I didn't expect. He nodded. Not a plea, not a challenge. An acknowledgement, as if to say, me both lived through a house we set on fire. I nodded back. We didn't speak. It was the most honest exchange we'd had in years. At home that evening, I cooked a simple dinner and ate it at the table with the wobbly bowl and the dahlias and the dog who now took up the whole end of the rug like a guardian who had fallen asleep on duty after the danger passed. I poured a small glass of wine and stepped out onto the porch. The air smelled like the first hint of fall, smoke you almost imagine. I thought about vows. Not the ones a pastor orchestrates, but the ones you make when no one is watching. I promised myself two things: to listen the first time my body whispers no, and to celebrate the first time it says yes without asking for permission. I whispered the promises out loud because there is power in hearing your own mouth choose you. Later, in bed, I picked up a pen and wrote on an index card I keep on my nightstand: clarity is a habit. I tucked it under the lamp. I turned off the light. The ceiling fan traced its circles like it always had, but it no longer felt like a metronome measuring the rhythm of an ending. It felt like a clock that had been rewound to the hour the story turned toward me. In the morning, I woke up before the alarm and lay there quiet, the way you do when you're checking the weather inside your chest. It was clear. I made coffee, dropped a cinnamon stick into the mug, and smiled because I finally understood why I had done that all those years, not for him, but because I liked the way it made the kitchen smell like a memory I had decided to keep. I opened the back door and let Penny run in wide circles, the kind of joy that has no use for language. The sky had that washed out blue that means the day plans to keep its promises. I stood there and breathed. I used to think revenge would be the best part. The binder, the party, the gasp, it was satisfying, it was necessary. But it wasn't the best part. The best part was what came after: the slow architecture of a life I built without asking anyone to co-sign my blueprints. The best part was the quiet and the laughter that returned without permission, and the grace I learned to extend to the versions of me that got me here. The best part was the simplest truth, the one I'd been talked out of for 2 decades. I was never too much. I was never not enough. I was exactly who I needed to be to make a home out of rubble. One day near winter, I walked past a bakery and saw a little card in the window that said, "Special orders welcome." I went in and asked if they could write on a cake. The woman behind the counter, hair in a scarf, hands flowered like a benediction, smiled and said, "What words?" I considered the usual suspects. "Congratulations. Best wishes." I said 2 words. "Make them pretty." She nodded and handed me the box an hour later. I took it home, lifted the lid, and laughed so hard I had to sit down. The script was careful and a little ornate, like a wedding invitation. It said, "Moving forward." I sliced a piece and ate it with a fork standing up in the kitchen, like a secret. Then I cut another slice and knocked on my neighbor's door and said, I over-ordered. We ate in her doorway and talked about nothing important until it became briefly everything. When I went back inside, I put the rest of the cake in the wobbly bowl and set it in the center of the table. I lit a candle, not for him, not for us, for me, for the woman who learned to turn on the lights and, when she saw what was there, didn't look away. That night, before sleep, I found the old note on the back of the 10th anniversary photo tucked into a drawer with scissors and spare keys. Halfway to forever. I touched the ink with my thumb. We had been exactly halfway to the end of who I was then and the beginning of who I am now. I slid the note back into the drawer with a smile and a small farewell. If this were a story for an audience that needs fireworks, this is where the sky would split. But my sky held. It didn't need to perform. It only needed to be wide enough for the life I had finally chosen. I turned off the lamp. Penny snored. The house, the one I paid for, the one I cleaned, the one I defended, the one I quieted, settled around me like a whole sentence with the period in the right place. I slept, for real, and in the morning when I woke, I did not reach for my phone to check for lies. I reached for the day.